Okay, so today's gathering, just a little overview, is going to be a walkthrough of the Connected and Directed Guide, and you'll hear stories from the guest speakers that are on this call, and then we will have time for question and answers at the end. And feel free to use the Q&A side of your options below on the bottom of your screen. You can put your questions in there. We're going to try and collect them as well, and record just any of the conversation that happened today. By the way, my name is Stephanie. I am with Connect the Dots, and I'm a project manager here. I've been with the team now for a few months, but I wanted to introduce everyone to Marissa, our CEO and founder. Marissa, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to welcome you all and thank you so much for joining. As Stephanie said, I'm the founder and CEO of Connect the Dots. And for those of you who don't know us, I just wanted to give you a quick introduction. So Connect the Dots is an impact-driven firm that specializes in community engagement and outreach. And we work across the Northeast and beyond. We're particularly focused on connecting diverse voices to decision-making by working to build innovative, creative, and meaningful engagement and outreach methods. And we make those methods work to elevate community and stakeholder voices in participatory processes. We do this work across sectors, but especially in placemaking, transportation, economic development, and planning. We are so happy to connect the dots with you all today. And I am passing it over now to Roseanne, one of our principals at Connect the Dots, to take it away.
Hi, thanks, Marissa. And thank you all for joining us today, whether you're live with us right now or watching the webinar on our website later. We really appreciate you and your interest in this topic. And the reason why we at Connect the Dots decided to create this guide and do this white paper is because we had so many questions and so much interest about this. As planners and people who work in public spaces, we feel conflict in different ways. And we have spent about 6 months looking at different approaches to conflict from all different fields. We've been looking from psychology and family therapy to planning as well, and social work and different fields that work in this space. And I really appreciate our panelists for being here today, not just for participating in the webinar, but also participating in the creation of the conflict guide itself, Connected and Directed. So I'd love to give them the chance to introduce themselves. Like I said, I'm Roseanne Lubick. I'm a principal here at Connect the Dots. I am a planner. My background is in transportation and economic development, and now I've been with Connect the Dots for a few years, really focusing on public engagement specifically. But first, I'd like to introduce you to Patty Codina. Go ahead, Patty.
Thanks, Roseanne. I am the Community Development Director at Impact Services. I have been in this role for about 7 years. My background is in architecture and community planning, and also in affordable housing. In my role at Impact, we've been working in the Kensington neighborhood in Philadelphia, which has been the epicenter of the opioid crisis for many years now. And I was tasked with bringing together the neighborhood plan and later the implementation of that neighborhood plan. And throughout all of this process, we've been very community driven and community led. It's been a very participatory process, and conflict has been almost an inevitable part of any community meeting. Anytime that you want to bring about change in a community, this is something that comes up, and I'm really excited to be able to talk about this and this guide. Thank you.
Amir, introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for having me. First off, my name is Amir Richardson. I serve as the Community Conversations Convener for WHYY, and I'm the lead organizer of an initiative called Bridging Blocks. It's between WHYY and the Free Library, and we convene diverse households from different backgrounds, different perspectives, and we have difficult conversations. And it runs the gambit from parking to school funding, housing, gentrification, preserving history, gun violence, just so many topics that kind of affect the day-to-day life of a Philadelphian. And we convene at local libraries every month and we have a conversation. And yeah, really excited to be here, excited to share and excited to learn for sure. And thank you for having me.
And finally, Cindy, the first person who I spoke with, if you could introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me as well. My name is Cindy Light, and I work for the City of Orlando's Office of Communications and Neighborhood Relations, and I'm the Neighborhood Relations Supervisor. And my main role is to work with neighborhood associations and organizations throughout our city, provide support, training, and really create relationships. We're part of the mayor's office, so we're an extension of the mayor out in the neighborhood, and we have the residents back, so we help decipher government speak a lot and help residents understand what's happening. And we handle conflict all the time, whether it's a phone call one-on-one at a small association board meeting or large community meeting. So I appreciate you having me here.
And it's funny, for the person who's here from College Park, Patty and I both went to University of Maryland. But moving on, what exactly is conflict and why are we doing this? So one of the things that I love so much about what we do and the beauty of public engagement is it brings so many different people together. We all stand in different shoes. We all have different perspectives and experiences, and the richness of bringing those experiences together is what makes our job so fantastic. So the benefit of public participation is that it brings together people with different experiences and opinions who all care deeply about their communities. But these different perspectives can lead to conflicts that separate us because we don't always understand the perspectives of other people. So as practitioners, as the people who are convening these participatory processes, we can find ways to smooth through the conflict and create pathways towards understanding and growth. We want to weave a community fabric that's reflective of everyone and create a deeper understanding and closer ties than ever before. So what Connected and Directed is really about is the practical skills and what we can do to really understand how we can create a process and a space for understanding each other and getting what we need to be able to keep processes moving forward while also strengthening our communities. So what we're going to talk about today is understanding conflict. What are the causes of conflict? What are the root things that go into it? Developing your skill set and your mindset for how to overcome conflict when it happens. Planning public events and how we can, both before and during public events, whether that's a small group or a large group or a one-on-one interaction, really work to mitigate and then redirect conflict. And then taking care of yourself and your team to make sure that we're going into all of these fresh and ready to go and not getting kind of burned out by these processes. So understanding conflict. It might seem obvious that, well, conflict happens because someone's upset. But there are a lot of different reasons why someone can be upset. And we do dig into that a little bit in here. So first off is a history of trauma. And this is something Patty and her team have done so much work on. So I want to have Patty, if you can, talk to us a little bit about what the history of trauma can mean for a community.
So I think we are all more familiar with trauma as it relates to how it personally happens in your life, like if childhood trauma, and how that can affect your development. And but there is also another level of trauma which can come from environmental factors, living in a community plagued with violence, with living in intergenerational poverty, living through a war. These are all environmental causes of trauma that also affect how individuals react, interact with each other, interact with their community. And being aware of what those are in the community that you're working with, it becomes really important. Just acknowledging that it's there and anticipating how you want to create a safe space so that you don't recreate these traumatizing experiences. So, for example, in the Kensington neighborhood in Philadelphia, as I mentioned, it has been the focus of the opioid crisis. There's very high levels of gun violence, the hottest drug corners in the entire, the greatest concentration of drug corners in the entire city is here. Intergenerational poverty, as I mentioned, this has been a problem, you know, since the 80s and even before, when the factories left the neighborhood. And it really marked a very sharp decline. So recognizing that these are causes of serious and repeated and daily trauma for the community, and how that shows up in a community meeting, for example, that can show up as in, well, first of all, it's really hard to get people out to actually come and engage. So it takes some time to build trust. There's an immediate distrust of any new members coming into the community. And it also shows in the relationships between neighbors. There might be a lot of aggression or a lot of just not a lot of lack of friendliness, so to speak. And in terms of conflict, very quick escalations. So that is kind of how we see it show up in a community meeting.
Right. So the next one I'm going to talk about is the precedent of poor engagement. If you are in a community that has felt undermined or left behind, or a public process in the past has not been inclusive or has resulted in a damaged relationship, you will have a harder and a higher hill to climb in your next process. And that's something that we hear a lot from people who we are working with, that they go in with all of the right intentions and all of the right ideas, and they want to do the right thing, but something that happened 20 years ago even is a barrier to their process. So just acknowledging that has happened and is there is something important. Misunderstanding or misinformation. Cindy, I think that you had a quick example of how this can arise in a process.
Absolutely. So, misunderstandings, right, come from not understanding something. And it's really important, I know, when we work with neighborhood associations or in community meetings, to really know what your demographic is, the age of the people that are attending, what the rumor mill has kind of spread. I know with community meetings, people are coming in thinking things are happening, which is not correct. And you really have to appreciate where people are. One thing that I love to do is, because we work with residents and we always have that resident hat on, like from their perspective. So we work a lot with planners, and they're doing community meetings on different things. And I always say to the planner, I said, this is great presentation. It really shows what's coming. Show that presentation to your sister, to your mother, to somebody who has no idea what you do before, and make sure that they can understand what you are saying in that presentation. Because if they can't, or they have a lot of questions, it's gonna go even further with the audience you're talking to. So, we get so caught up in that government speak and what things are, but it's really important to take that information and for lack of a better word, make it as, dumb it down or make it as simple as possible. So people to really understand and dispel those misunderstandings of what they're hearing. I mean, they're never really intentional to have a misunderstanding, but it's really important to make sure that you're clear and concise with what you're saying to be able to avoid that.
Yeah, we recommend in the guide to keep everything at an 8th grade level, and we use an app called Hemingway for our writing to try to keep it to that. And finally, Amir, let's talk a little bit about differing perspectives and delicate topics, because what you do is intentionally bring people together with differing perspectives to talk about delicate topics.
Yeah.
So how do you do that?
First, I'll just say having different perspectives is an important thing. All that really means is that it's a different human experience that's present in a room, and sharing your story kind of helps us develop empathy. Empathy helps us build solidarity, and solidarity is how we really make meaningful material change in a more immediate sense than kind of waiting for the slow gears to turn in politics. We can really make an impact in someone's life immediately if we understand where they're coming from. So I'll just start by saying having those different perspectives are very, very important. Last year, we had a conversation about reproductive rights. And as you can imagine, those varying perspectives were really, really tough to kind of navigate through dialogue. There were people present who took the stance of being pro-life or pro-birth, as some might say. There were other people who were obviously pro-choice in the room. And really, it's just allowing people to speak one at a time, to not shy away from discomfort. Discomfort is how you again, start to find that human element in someone's experience, which really is, that's what I'm always trying to find out. Like, what's the story and what's the experience behind this position that someone might be taking? Because, it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about a second ago. There might be some misinformation. There might be some misunderstanding. There might be a disconnect there that you can speak to. And at the end of the day, just inform someone. I know at the end of that discussion around reproductive rights, I was incredibly apologetic. I felt so bad because there was such tension in the room, and I felt like maybe I exposed someone to trauma. And so I was kind of having one-on-ones as people were exiting, just kind of checking in with them. And it was one person who I really wanted to apologize to, and he just stopped me and he actually thanked me for essentially holding a space where they can speak to someone that they normally don't speak with. And I saw that as the value of the program, because oftentimes people kind of like sit in their silos, in their echo chambers, and if they do speak with someone, it's through a device, but they certainly don't sit down at a table across from someone that they vehemently disagree with and are able to share their story. And the gratitude that they kind of expressed to me was, thank you for allowing me to tell my story directly to someone who disagrees with me and oftentimes doesn't see me. So they were very, very thankful for that. So I think navigating those different perspectives is just, acknowledge your own limitations, your own humanity. You don't know everything. Allow those perspectives to live in the same space, and try to have some ground rules. Ground rules always helps.
We are going to get to ground rules in a little while. That is going to be a big part of that. But I want to make sure that we have some time to talk about, once you understand some of the causes of conflict and you can start to recognize, why does this person feel the way that they feel? What might be the reason and the motivation behind why this person is reacting emotionally in this situation? You can start thinking through how you respond through your own skill set and through your mindset. And if there's one thing that I've taken away throughout the entirety of the conflict guide, of the creation of this, connected and directed, sorry, we always call it the conflict guide, it is the CLARA method. This is actually something from family therapy. So if you've been to therapy, you might recognize this. But we found this, and it's a tool for slowing things down and considering your response in an emotional situation. And as a facilitator, the natural response of all humans is to start in the fourth with respond. But if you take a minute and you start by centering and just focusing, listening, and giving the full attention to your participant and making sure that you're active listening and affirming and acknowledging your participants' viewpoints, then you can think through and provide a response. And then you can add additional information and detail from there. So that's something that we kind of thought through as something really important to include. And this is also something that you'll find on the worksheet for the day of worksheet. But then we also wanted to create a shared mindset, because how you enter a space will affect how you perceive the interactions with it. If you go into a space expecting that this is going to be difficult, this is going to be hard, this is going to be really challenging for me, and I'm going to hate this, you're probably to. So setting expectations for all your team members and making sure that, a member of the team who's really negative about this engagement activity isn't going to bring the whole team down with them. And getting everybody kind of aligned around this shared goal. So to that end, we've created this shared mindset of things to remember. Going in with an open mind, empathy, and a willingness to listen. When we're in a process, a participatory process, we are there to listen. And empathy is a word that we've been coming up with quite a bit. There's something to be learned from every interaction. Amir, there was something that you had wanted to say about something to be learned from every interaction.
You know, I always come back to empathy, and I always come back to finding out people's stories. You know, I work for WHYY, and there's an emphasis on story and information and news and things like that. And so I think the best way to get through, or excuse me, to get to someone's story is to listen to them. And I feel like, yeah, every interaction leaves a little breadcrumb, I guess, to what their experiences are, what their goals might be, what their fears are, what they're looking to avoid, how they like their community to look, what they, you know, all these different things. It's right there in each, you know, one-on-one conversation that you have. Generally, we have small conversations. We don't do like more than 50, and it might turn into a town hall. So
It might have been Patty who wanted to say something about
Oh.
something to be learned from every interaction.
yeah.
You had something that you had insight here.
Yes, as I mentioned, my background is in architecture and community planning, and often as a professional, you come into a room wanting to share the solution to the problem. I think that is the opposite of the attitude you need to have when you have a participatory process. It's really recognizing that the people you are speaking with are the experts on their community, and that really you need to understand and learn from them rather than think that you have the answers. That was kind of my 2 cents on that. I learned that early on.
Yeah. And this is something that has also really stuck with me, and that is that opinions that are shared about the work are not opinions about you or your worth or your value of the contributions to whatever project it is that you're working on. And Cindy, this is something that came from your team, and it's something that you remind the planners and engineers that you're working with quite a bit.
Yeah, you know, talking about that. So one thing, just to mention what you mentioned earlier, one thing I really encourage when we do our training of our board members is when they come into that first space, they're coming from work or home or whatever the case may be, and they got a lot going on, I always encourage them to take 30 seconds and just center themselves and go around the room really quick. Why did you get involved? Why are you here today? What, you know, and really bring people back to the reason that they got involved in the first place. It kind of gets them out of that, you know, oh, I should be home doing this or doing that. But, you know, we really talk about why when people are coming into a meeting, why are they coming in? Are they coming to learn, or are they already coming in with a fight, wanting a fight? And, you know, they're going to be maybe not so nice. And it's really important to hear them and acknowledge them, but don't, like you mentioned, take it personally. It's not about you. It's about whatever it is that the topic at hand is. And so it's really important to know that you're there and to help and support and teach, and not to worry about taking it personally. You know, and to this next point, can I talk real quick about this?
Yeah,
next?
you also have a really specific way that you do this.
Yeah, so, you know, people ask a lot of questions. They come in there. They want to be heard, right? So we always write down what people say. It's really important to, as they're saying, you know, they're complaining or whatever, is to actually have an easel pad and to write down what they're saying with the words they're using. So if they're using whatever words they're using, you're writing that down and you're making sure that you're really hearing what they're saying. And you don't have to know the answer to all their questions. It's okay to say, I don't know. But what we do is, because we're not the subject experts, right? You know, but if people are having questions on certain things, we will make sure that when it's written down, we have it, right? And so we will go either to the source and get the answer, or connect them to the person with the answer and get back to them within 24 to 48 hours. It's really important for that follow through. And so, you know, it's okay to be transparent and to not know and say that, but you will get them the answer. And by writing it all down, they are more comfortable because they know they've been heard.
Yeah. And then this last one, some conversations might be uncomfortable, but discomfort is temporary and finite, and it will end. And Amir, you kind of mentioned this when we were talking about some of the conversations that you've had, but was there anything else that you wanted to add here?
Yeah, I would just add quickly that, these things don't get solved quickly, and community engagement is kind of like a long run plan. You don't, we never step into an event or a conversation like, hey guys, we're going to talk about this and solve it immediately. It's an ongoing engagement process that helps us all learn about one another and build a stronger community.
Yeah. And we also, want to just make sure that we remember to have enough space for people to share their frustrations and feelings. We are often the only person who is in a position of authority that someone is seeing in months that end. So they could be venting frustrations about something that is completely unrelated. And that's why one of the recommendations we have is to always have a visible parking lot of ideas. And what Cindy was saying about making sure that we have a way to get back to people is also important. But then when you're in that situation, remain calm, because the energy that you project will be what people catch on to. So if you start getting emotional and escalating, it will just continue. And remember that we're there as a team, and we're there to back each other. And sometimes an intervention from another team member just to either give the individual who's been talking to them a break, or just kind of break the person's fixation on one person is really also helpful. And if you as an individual facilitator need to take a break, take a break. If you're starting to feel like you need to take a break, then take a break, and we'll talk about safety plans in a little bit. But planning for public participation. And when we talk about public participation, this comes in a lot of different forms. I think the public meeting is the first thing that comes to mind, but we see public participation in a lot of different ways. This can be one-on-one conversations with people. This can be a pop-up situation where we're meeting people on the street right where they are. It can be steering committees and small groups or focus groups. And it can also be the large-scale public meeting. So we've created here kind of a pre-event checklist of things that we think are important for us to include. This graphic is in the guide, and it's something that's towards the end, so you can print it out separately and kind of keep it with you. But making sure that the meeting agenda allows for that space for two-way sharing of information, making sure that all of the communications are understandable and that visuals are also accompanied by descriptions. And if you are putting those online, that they're in the metadata for the graphics. Ground rules are clearly stated. We're going to get to ground rules on the next slide. And making sure that you have a staffing plan that allows for team members to work in pairs or in groups so that you can be close enough to help manage any potential issues. And the final one is making sure that we have a visible parking lot of ideas and someone designated to speak to individuals and highly engaged concerned citizens in a more private setting if the need arises. So this is an example of some ground rules. We took these from the University of Minnesota. We thought that they were really good. Amir, you have a shorter version of the ground rules that you use. But this is also something that can just be, picked up and dropped in as an example of ground rules if you want to do this. But setting ground rules is really important. And these ground rules work both for participants and for facilitators. But Amir, do you want to talk a little bit about how you set your ground rules and the ones that you share with your groups?
Sure. No, as you said, they're a lot shorter. They're about 4. I'll pull them up in a second. But a lot of times it's just like one person speaks at a time. Be curious, have fun, and know that we're not going to solve whatever issue that we're discussing in one event. And we really encourage people to go to their local libraries. We try to support the library here in Philadelphia. It's, a real strong, lasting institution of democracy. So we really try to lift that up a lot.
And then talking a little bit more, like we have these ground rules at the entrance to any event that's in person. We'll also put them on a slide at the beginning of a virtual presentation and just make sure that people are aware. In some meetings, we've even had people sign in with them on a sign-in sheet if we think that it's a meeting where we might have some contentious issues. And then during a meeting. So we've talked a lot about having this parking lot and redirecting and reorienting. So that's something that we can include. We can also, like these quotes that are down here on the bottom, we've included some sample ideas of just scripts. What can you say when you are talking to someone? If someone is way off topic and really just digging into something that's really specific, you can even ask, like, how does this specific concern benefit the community at large? Try to bring it back to thinking about the community as a whole. If someone is very adamant that something specific needs to be done, ask if they would be willing to champion the idea and lead to the development of a solution, working with the agency or the entity that you're working with. So we've included some of this here and also in the document. But let's talk about emotional check-ins. Patty, this is something that comes from Impact Services and the Connected Communities tool that you've put together. But what are emotional check-ins and how can they be helpful here?
Yes. First of all, we can't take full credit for this. This is part of the sanctuary model. But we really have implemented it in our practice. So emotional check-ins are designed to create a bond between people who are in the room, create a connection. They also help the facilitator take the temperature of the room. How are people coming into the room? It helps figure that out. It also contributes to an individual's emotional intelligence. We don't often talk about our emotions as such. So sometimes when you're being asked, how are you feeling? We usually say, oh, good. Well, what does good actually feel like? So inviting people to actually discuss an emotion kind of helps us bring some emotional intelligence into the conversation. And we've tried to adopt that as a group setting also. Internally at Impact, we do it at all of our internal meetings, but we've also been able to include them in community meetings often. So it's been a good way to kind of take that temperature and inadvertently, almost without effort, create connection between people who are there already. And that can be very useful in preventing some of the interactions that might happen later.
And in some cases, it can also be a fun icebreaker. I've seen them where it's like, pick your cat photo that feels how you're feeling that day, and you have a bunch of funny animal pictures. So they can be lighthearted while also still having people get attuned with their emotions in a way that we don't usually see in a public process. Cindy, designating a local facilitator. This is something that you do a lot. We also do this.
Absolutely. It's really important. Again, you really need to know your audience. And is a city staff person in a suit the best person to address the audience or to facilitate the conversation? Is it a local community leader that might be somebody that the people already know, that might be a good respected person in the community to help facilitate that? It's something that we always look at for community meetings. I wanted to quickly add for that parking lot. I'm not sure. I love when I first met with you, you mentioned the word parking lot, and I love that because I don't hear people use that term. And something that wasn't mentioned is having that agenda. It's really important to have that agenda with that start and end time on that, because it really, you're mindful of people's time. And that parking lot is for when there's ideas that come up, there's things that come off that are not on the agenda, or things that needs more time to talk about, and putting literally writing on a sticky note and putting it up on an easel pad, so it's there next time. It's super important to really not forget about it, but be able to kind of prevent the meeting from getting derailed. I think that's super
And
important.
we're calling it a parking lot here because that's kind of the familiar term for it. But I actually, in most of the meetings, call it a loading zone because I think it's a little bit more positive than we're going to just like park it here and leave it. It's like it's loading, it's waiting.
So we actually created a big, like a poster of an actual parking lot, and we bought car, like sticky notes in the shape of cars. And we
Okay.
literally have people like will write there what that is, and they'll put it in the parking lot, and then for next time or for whatever, it just makes it a little bit more fun.
Well, you're in Florida, so you probably do a lot of things with cars, and I'm in Philly, so we have a lot of buses.
Yes.
So the loading zones and the cars are indicative of our development. But working with a local facilitator, yes, making sure that people are recognizable. We feel like this has been really important for us when we are working in communities where we have members of the project team and no one is local. And that happens quite a bit in planning work. You'll have members of the community and nobody is from the place. So we'll work with a local nonprofit or a local community group to co-host with us and make sure that we have someone there who is helping us convene the meeting and is an active participant. And we do try to compensate as much as possible for those roles based off of whatever the restrictions are on the funding source that we have. And so we will compensate for that. Patty, you just unmuted. Is there something you wanted to add?
Yeah, just adding to that, I think often what we found really successful in the terms of the co-facilitating is if you can add to an existing meeting rather than creating another meeting that people have to go to, that is also a really good way of, first of all, being respectful of their time, of already, being respectful of the leadership of the person who has convened that meeting, right? Supporting that leadership. So just wanted to add that.
I also love that someone just told us in the chat that they have used the term bike rack for the parking lot / loading zone. Thank you, Erin. So the last thing that I want to mention is trying a new meeting format. We have a few of these in the document that you can look at. One of them is it's trying a circle, which is it's a new old meeting format. We borrowed that from a EPA tribal relations document, and it's based off of Native peoples communication style. And that was a really interesting approach to how you can convene both smaller and larger groups of people. So I would recommend looking at that in there. For larger meetings, we usually try to do an open house style because it allows for people to come and go as they can stay. And it creates less division between the project team and the people who are presenting and the people who are attending. We don't have sides. When you're in an open house, people can have one-on-one conversations and direct access to the people who are speaking. So we try to do open houses as much as possible. But I definitely recommend looking at the guide and seeing what's in there for new meeting formats and seeing if you could try something a little bit different. Handling the fear of change. There is a very natural reaction. People do not like change. And a lot of the conflict, we didn't include this as one of the root causes of conflict, but this is something that is just a natural reaction that can come up. And one of the exercises that we talked about with you, Patty, is self. And going through this process of talking through what are the feelings that you are experiencing as change is imminent or change is proposed. So is that something you can run through with me really fast, Patty?
Absolutely. And again, this framework is also part of the sanctuary model. And we found it very helpful in helping a group navigate that process of change. We've often found, there's one example, this was less of a community setting, it was more of an internal setting, but it kind of shows where these things can show up. So there was a new procedure adopted at Impact in one department where, they would go to all electronic files, and people were having a really hard time doing that. So we actually facilitated a self-session where we discussed as a group, what were the safety implications of adopting this change. The next step is to discuss, and you don't have to do these in order, by the way. We usually set them up as a quadrant, and it's kind of, you want to record these things, put them in writing as people are saying them. In terms of emotion, you talk about, well, what actual emotions are you experiencing with this change? What will you lose if we adopt this new system? And then finally, what does the future look like when this new system is adopted? And we found this to be a very practical way to get people to actually think of the future, because that is also a trauma response, not being able to imagine the future. So you really, and that's often where people where there's a barrier, or people can't get past that. Well, things feel safe now. This change is just making me feel so uncomfortable. I can't even think what it would actually look like in the future. And when we get to the future part, more often than not, all of the things that people mention in the future are positive. They just hadn't even allowed themselves to think about that. So going through this very methodic way and expected ritual, so to speak, of how to talk about change has been very helpful. By the end of that meeting, people were actually happy that this was happening. They understood why we were doing it. So that was.
It can really change the way that people respond to something by using this method. Really quickly, we have within the guide some tips. I want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A. But we have some tips on what you can do when you experience someone who is emotionally charged. This first one, bringing someone a glass of water. If you hand someone a glass of water and they start to drink it, they'll drink some of the water, they'll take a deep breath. And by the time they come back to wherever they are, the moment has kind of calmed down. It's very hard to stay angry in that moment. And we bring a pitcher and cups because it's just so much easier to transport no matter where you are. You can usually get that around. You don't have to haul big cases of water around, and you can just keep refilling the pitcher. Taking care of yourself and your team. The personal safety plan is something that, again, Patty, we talked about with you, where it's something that as facilitators, you can work on to put together actions that you can perform if you become stressed. So something simple and low key that you can do, and then something that would require another person, place, or thing to complete. Would you want to talk a little bit about how this has been used in your work?
Yes, at Impact, this is more of a facilitator. Like, this is actually all of our employees go through this. We think about a safety plan as, what are 3 things that you can do if you are in a meeting with your boss and you don't want to get fired? Like, if you get angry or something, we're like, think about it. Like, you're getting angry and you want to, what can you do so that you don't have an outburst that might eventually get you fired? So what are the things that you can do in your place? And we really encourage people to think about connecting to your body. For example, drinking a sip of water connects you to your body. So it gets you away from your away from your emotions, away from your mind, and kind of more in touch with your other senses. Somebody in one group shared that she keeps her mom's perfume next to her desk. So she just, discreetly takes a whiff of that, and it brings her to a kind of more calm space away from that situation that is triggering them. Pinching yourself, sometimes pinching your leg again takes you away from that. Breathing is a classic one. It just really, brings down the emotions. So we say do 3, and we actually keep them in a lanyard. And I'll just briefly say a fun experience with one of our maintenance workers. I was from maintenance team. I was in the elevator coming up, and I said, "Hey, Cam, good morning. How are you doing?" And he looked at me, showed me his lanyard, and he's like, I'm breathing, Patty, because we're having a hard day. So keeping your safety plan someplace visible is also a really good reminder, because you often forget in the moment when you're getting you know, when your blood pressure is going up, you forget about your safety plan. So keeping it visible is also a helpful
So
thing.
one of the things that we created is a worksheet for facilitators, and on it is a place that you can write out the safety plan.
Mhm.
We also really recommend remembering to take care of your team, and telling your team about each other's safety plans, and also adding an emotional check-in to your team's prep meeting before you go out into any kind of field work, making sure that people know what everyone's emotional state is, because life also happens and we could be stressed for completely other reasons. And if you're going into a situation already stressed, it could affect the way that your public engagement is going to go. And taking care of your team long term is also really important as well. So I wanted to make sure that we still had some time for Q&A. I'm going to bring it to Stephanie to start asking us some questions here.
Yes, we got some amazing questions in the chat. We have about 10 minutes, and I'm just going to assign one of our featured speakers to respond. So the first question from Allison is, how do we get public agencies to be okay with discomfort or hard questions during meetings? And then also, what value do you find in allowing individual attendees to speak to everyone in attendance at a meeting that can get aggressive or accusing versus breaking out into smaller groups to avoid grandstanding? I'm going to give that to Cindy.
Thanks. I know that especially working with elected officials, people don't like the conflict. They want to see a calm meeting. It's really important to have people understand that it's okay to have the discussions, and you know, as long as they're respectful. And it's a really good way to find out what the community really wants. You may think that you're going the right way, and but based on what you're hearing and what these discussions are, it may need to pivot a little bit. And I think that that's a good thing. You don't want to get, you know, down the road and then have to backtrack. It's really important to kind of bring the community along the way of your project or whatever that is. Then they're part of it. It's a partnership. It's going to affect them. And you know, we work with our elected officials to really and to really understand that, and to really make sure that they know that, like, you know, it's okay to have these hard questions because they need to be asked now. Otherwise, it's really will be worse at the other end, further down.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing in, the line about discomfort being temporary and finite. One of the people who we spoke with described the difficult public meetings to like a spin class. She said, like, I don't love it, but it takes 1 hour and then it's over. Done, and then it's over. So just reminding people that, like, it will be done. And once it's over, we can come back and process what is the reason for the conflict. What is it that, because sometimes you don't know, it's a surprise. And so being able to figure out what the solution is, in the end, you could have a better project. You could have a better outcome. Your purpose in having these public meetings is to make sure that you are building something that the public wants and that the public is happy with. So there is a reason that we're going in there. So going in with an open mind and empathy, and making sure that we're there, and all of that facilitator mindset work is really important for that. There was also a second part about letting people speak versus working in small groups. Amir, when you do your events, you break into small tables. Having the open house style is another recommendation that we have, because we do think that it's valuable to kind of break up that grandstanding moment. I don't know if there can be ways, but you also do a share back, right? So there are things that you can do where you can have smaller tables and then people share back. You can have things where you have an open house where there isn't really a big public comment, but if someone wants to, they'll just, they'll shout. We've had people shout in an open house before. So it can really it will happen either way. But I think that it doesn't necessarily have to be like a time for public comment. We have, in some of our events, been really intentional about that, where we set up a podium. And that was the point of it. We let people share their stories that way, and they were recorded. But there were other things happening at the meeting at the same time. So it was like the person was speaking to a camera. Sorry, next question. I know you want to know.
Sure. This is everyone quick. Tell me what your favorite brand or store is to find affordable community meeting facilitation supplies, like butcher paper, easels, jars for public comments, pens that don't run or smear. Where do you like to shop?
Blick Art Supplies.
Blick. Okay, amazing.
Staples.
Easy button.
Okay. Second or third question is, how do you break down barriers that are deep-rooted? Amir, I want to hear from you on this one.
I'm sorry, can you say that again, Stephanie?
Yeah, there's plates clanging in the background.
Yeah.
How do you break down barriers that are deep-rooted?
Yeah,
Patty.
so I'll go.
Mary, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
I was
Amir
gonna-
first, and then Patty.
I was gonna mention the ground rules. And I actually wanted to say this earlier. Language is always an interesting thing. Sometimes we turn ground rules into, hey, are you committed to having this conversation? And so, like, getting people to verbally say, I'm committed to this process, kind of like changes their approach and their mindset a little bit. And so if someone's saying, I'm committed to finding an answer, I'm committed to getting through this difficult process, it changes the position of this adversarial discussion of, this is my position, what's yours, to now this is a project and we're going to dialogue through it and try to find it. And so I think playing around with language and format is always big, and ground rules is always something that I fall back on.
Yeah, I echo that. In the meeting, in the moment, definitely how you're communicating, language you're using, also making sure you have translation services if needed, right? Or making sure that your co-facilitator, who is a local community person, can maybe help break down some of those barriers. If you have more time, this is something that really is before the meeting, developing some relationships. Trust is a big barrier in many of these communities. So if you are able to establish some key relationships before coming into the meeting and make sure those people are in the room with you, that will also help start to bring people out a little bit more and break down some of those barriers.
Question is, how do you respond to a racist or biased comment in a way that takes a clear stance in support of those who may be personally hurt by the comment, doesn't create more conflict, keeps the meeting moving? So how do you deal with very inflammatory comments in the moment? Anyone? This is open for anyone.
I mean, I think you refer back to those rules, of being respectful, and that we're not going to kind of give an audience to that step. We're referring back to the rules, and that, if you have a question that is, more respectful, that's one thing. But, this is, you're not going to be able to respond in a way that really is, at that point, your response is really not the issue. People are going to be focused on that, on the terrible comments and the people or person that it hurt. So I would refer back to the rules, whether they're posted on the wall or wherever they are. That that doesn't kind of cut it here.
To that, I would just say, I'm pretty committed to keeping a safe space, a space where people feel comfortable to bare minimum sit inside of. I haven't had to do this, thank God. But I imagine that there might be a scenario where a perspective in the room might need to be removed, or there might need to be a boundary set, especially if we're talking about discriminatory, inflammatory language and things like that.
And I would add to that, just quickly redirecting to what it is that we're talking about today. Not just leaving, not just kind of saying we're not talking about that today and leaving it there, but rather saying what we are talking about is this, and quickly shift.
Patty,
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ruben.
I was going to say, I did see one in the chat that seems to have started a little bit of conversation about how to elevate the public participation of vulnerable and marginalized community members, and how to decenter the voices in the room who are used to being heard to make space for that. One of the things that's difficult, this is obviously in the context of a public meeting, and I just want to address that a public meeting might not be the right tool. And we need to make sure that we're fitting the tool that will work. And asking people to come to a public meeting, particularly like demographics that feel marginalized and left behind, you might need to try a different tactic. You might need to go to other people. So I just wanted to kind of call that out. As far as that, like one person speaks at a time, making sure that there's the opportunity for people to all be heard in those ground rules is also an important part of that, since we were on the topic of ground rules.
We also make sure that there's like index cards or some way that people can give input or ask questions and like leave it on the table if they don't feel comfortable speaking in public, but they still want to be able to share their ideas and thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah, I would add that there are two examples of where we found that we one time we were redoing a rec center and we needed children's voices, and we knew that a public meeting or community meeting was not a place where we were going to get children to speak. We might get children to attend, but they will likely not speak. Another one was so we then just did some activities in their after school programming, right? Coming to them, meeting people where they are. Same thing with the homeless population, our outdoor neighbors. We knew that even if they did dare come to a public meeting, they would not speak up. So we actually had a focus group of persons either active in their addiction and it was just, to get their perspective.
Cool. So I think that we are
at time. Yep.
done.
This is such a robust conversation, and I know there's so many more questions in the chat, both in the chat and in the Q&A. We are collecting them, and we're going to try and respond to them and put it all together in a document, because it'll not just help the person who asked the question, but all of us that are part of this conversation, and those that weren't able to attend can still participate in that way. So first of all, thank you so much to our featured speakers. I really appreciate your knowledge. And just some follow-up steps for everyone that attended today. There's still ways that you can connect with us. We're bringing up the slides next steps. So feel free to continue sending us your questions by end of day today, 5 p.m. You can email the hello@connectthedotsinsights.com, and we will include it in the Q&A document. And then check your email, because we will be sending out the link for the connected and directed guide so that you can have it with you. It'll be a digital copy, and something that you will be able to use in your practice. And then visit our website, Connect the Dots. I'm going to also drop this all in the chat as well. Connect the Dots to find out more, and then connect with our partners that came today. Impact Services Trauma Informed Community Engagement Tool is something that is an amazing resource, and you can read and you can download and read it. And then Amir is going to be hosting a Bridging Blocks community conversation next week. You can attend that event and learn more. I'm going to drop that link also in the chat. And then also the City of Orlando has an amazing bank of resources that you can read. And for those that are facilitators, check out the guides that they have prepared and learn some more. So with that, like I said, we'll be following up with an email to share all what we've discussed today. And just thank you all so much for attending. We really value your time, and I hope that you take some of these tools into your practice. It is a practice. So we are constantly evolving and learning and growing. And thank you. I'm going to hang out a little bit in case people have additional questions, but feel free to leave. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you. So many thank yous in the chat. Thank you all.